Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our first talent talk through the Arvada Chamber of Commerce. We're really excited to be digging into what we think is one of the most important topics that's facing our region today, which is childcare. And we're going to cover a lot of ground this morning, and I'm glad to have our keynote with us that we do. I want to start today by inviting all of you to continue to be part of our conversations around childcare and other things through joining our Mighty Network channel, which we'll drop that link in the chat here in just a minute. I also would invite those businesses who have joined us today, if you haven't already completed our survey to be part of our talent network, we'd invite you to do that. So we'll also drop that link into the chat. As I said, excuse me, losing my voice this morning. Childcare is one of the most important issues right now. And oftentimes when I start having these conversations with people, they kind of tilt their head sideways and say, well, why is this a business issue? And it's a really important business issue that we've uncovered in recent months as we've started looking at how COVID-19 has impacted people's ability to return to work because of gaps in childcare, as well as the cost and access that isn't attainable for many of the employees that all of us work with. So there's a variety of different challenges associated with this big issue, and we're excited to dig in a little bit more today with Nicole Reel with Epic. We are going to go through a keynote presentation this morning by Nicole. After that, we're going to break into small breakout rooms to have a conversation about this. And so there's going to be 3 questions we're going to ask you, so you can be thinking about that as we go through today's session. The first is, what ahas or key takeaways did you have? What thoughts do you have on business engagement in our child care system? And then what other stakeholders need to play a role in improving child care for our region? So we'll ask you those 3 questions and then we'll end right at 9:30. As you heard, this session is being recorded. We had many people who couldn't join live today, and so we're eager to be able to share this further after today's session. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. Nicole joined Executives Partnering to Invest in Children, Epic, as president and CEO in September of 2019. Her experience spans across the private and nonprofit sectors, with her early childhood career beginning as a classroom teacher at the on-site employer child care program for Storage Tech in Louisville. After working in the financial sector on behalf of a large national home builder for several years, Nicole returned to early childhood and supported the quality ratings and onboarding of over 200 child care programs participating in the Denver preschool program after it was authorized by Denver voters in 2006. Her work grew to include the management of quality improvement initiatives and grant contracts at Qualistar, Colorado, which sparked her passion for nonprofit leadership and management. Most recently, Nicole held the position of Chief Operating Officer at Denver's Early Childhood Council, where she helped build a team of 35 staff and an organizational operating budget of $5.7 million over the course of 8 years. Nicole earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and management from the University of Colorado at Denver, and had a graduate certificate in nonprofit management and leadership from Duke University. She is an alumna of several leadership development programs. It stays active within the community as a local volunteer, national board member of Book Trust, and board member of YMCA of Metro Denver. Nicole is a Colorado native and enjoys traveling, cycling, skiing, and staying active with her husband and 2nd grade daughter in her free time. She's also become an incredible friend to me and support as we've been learning all about childcare. So thank you, Nicole, for being with us. Welcome, and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cami. I appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for joining us this morning. I'm going to pull up my screen here and go ahead and start sharing with everyone. So as Cami said, I am a Colorado native, but most importantly, I was actually born and raised in Arvada. So this is an especially important presentation for me because Arvada has a special place in my heart, as does Megara Poland, who's also on this webinar. So she was like a second mom to me growing up and lived 2 doors down. So hi, Megara. But yeah, so I grew up at 71st and Carr for the first part of my life and then moved over to Westwoods after that. So excited to be here and talk to you all today. So today we're really going to talk about the business of childcare and early education. Some might call it daycare, some might call it childcare. I'm going to use these terms interchangeably, but I'm really talking about the same thing because anytime these young children are in care settings, it's incredibly important and impactful on their life. A little bit about Epic, so you've got some background on us. Our mission is to serve as the business community's nonpartisan voice for early childhood here in Colorado. And we lead efforts to really build infrastructure and advance policies that support both the workforce of today and the developing workforce of tomorrow. And this little baby you see on the screen is actually my daughter when she was younger. She's now 8 years old and much more spirited and doesn't listen to me quite as much. But her name is Milana. And I always use this picture in my presentation to remind us that really, a lot of the work that we do is about these young minds and these young children who are developing in our communities. 90% of the brain's development happens in the first 5 years of life. And we know from many, many, many studies that have occurred that if we want children to be well poised for careers down the road, if we want them to be successful and contributing members of society, the best thing we can do is to make sure that they have the very healthiest and best educational experiences early in life when that brain development is happening, before they turn 5 or 6. So if people think that, it's great if we get to kids by kindergarten or even preschool, we've actually already missed the greatest window of opportunity in their life to impact their trajectory and their future career success. So incredibly important for these young ones to have these experiences. So first I want to dive into a little bit of data and talk about why this is also so important from a business perspective. So childcare is really key to attracting and retaining our talent. And we know that from a number of studies, a lot of data that's been coming out as a result of this pandemic, and also some local data as well. So looking at the age distribution, for example, for Jefferson County, we have a lot of young families in the Jefferson County and Arvada area. Lots of families with young children who are really trying to grow their careers, balance all that that entails, and also have young children who need to be cared for. We also know from a recent Pew Research study that actually was just released in like the last week or two, that the fourth leading issue for people leaving their jobs is because of childcare issues. Behind pay being too low or not having opportunities for advancement or even feeling disrespected at their job. Childcare issues are one of those leading causes now for people who are being asked, why are you leaving your job? It is a very serious issue and something that is commonly cited by working parents, but especially working mothers, as to why they are no longer participating in the workforce, maybe underemployed in the workforce, or moving jobs and finding and seeking other employers because of those challenges that they have. I also wanted to point out, this is a chart that actually shows the workforce participation rate for areas across the state of Colorado. So in other words, how many households have, all of the adults in the household working. Jefferson County, again, is close to the top of the list here when it comes to workforce participation, hovering around 67-68%. We anticipate those numbers are going to go up here in Colorado because, unfortunately, of course, the inflation has really become a huge issue for a lot of families just in terms of cost of living. But we also know that the real estate and other aspects of cost of living here in Colorado have become tremendously expensive for families as well. So we see more and more families where it is an economic imperative that they need to have both of those adults or all adults in the household, even if it's a single parent, working in the workforce in order to sustain that family and make sure they can continue to live in Colorado or in Arvada or wherever they choose to be here in our state. Couple of data points around COVID and the impacts on employees and relative to childcare. This is data that we've pulled from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that has conducted a number of studies and surveys throughout the pandemic. But you can see here there are a number of parents who are citing childcare as a reason as to why they haven't returned to work. 79% of parents saying that they had adverse impacts on their efforts or commitments due to childcare issues. Families turning positions down with employers because of this as an issue, and also, employers themselves seeing this as a challenge as they've gone through the pandemic. Based on this survey, we anticipate that we have almost about 45,000 families in Colorado that are making career sacrifices due to issues with childcare. So these are either parents who are not entering the workforce and they could be, or perhaps they're not participating in the workforce to the extent that they could because of these issues around access and affordability for childcare. So by no means is this a small number. This is many, many, many working parents or parents with young children, and most especially women and people of color who we oftentimes see the most impacted with these numbers. Oh, there we go. All right, so the next points I just wanted to also call out is, oftentimes employers are like, how many of my employees are we talking about here? We have McKinsey studies and others that have cited about 16% of the US workforce relies on childcare in some shape or form in order to participate. We know that Colorado is a much younger state in terms of its demographic composition and the number of families that have young children. So we're actually closer to 20% here in Colorado, as opposed to other states and what that looks like. We also know from some of these studies that women were twice as likely to report that they had stopped looking for work due to childcare, and also the fact that oftentimes women or working parents who are working in the workforce also feel like this is a bigger challenge for them when it comes to their own career progression, because they feel like they are trying to balance so much and are perhaps being looked down upon or aren't being given progression opportunities in their career because of these challenges with childcare and all those things that entails for them. I also wanted to call out this chart. EPIC worked with the Common Sense Institute in 2021 to do a report on the impacts of women in the workforce, because as we started to look at a lot of the labor data coming out throughout the pandemic, it became very clear that women were really taking the brunt of the employment and the workforce losses here in Colorado. And so this is a snapshot of what our workforce changes had looked like in May of 2021. And you can see that women with children had significantly different numbers when it came to their exit from the workforce, as opposed to even men or men with children themselves. So by May of 2021, we had actually seen that men had made progress in terms of their workforce progression and participation, but women were still behind, with women with children being the furthest behind in terms of their labor force participation rates. That's what LFPR stands for, by the way. So lots of acronyms being thrown around here. And unfortunately, this also brought us back to the lowest female workforce participation rate since 1988. So it was a significant difference in the number of females that we had in our workforce. And the reason this is important is because, we know that women participating in the workforce is also an economic imperative for our economy moving forward. If we actually look at the trends for women in the workforce in comparison to other countries, the United States has actually been declining for quite a while now. And many, anticipate that, things like access and affordability to childcare could certainly be driving these trends. But when we look at other countries that have had this upward trend in terms of women participating in the workforce, they also coincidentally tend to be countries that also subsidize the cost of childcare or offer free childcare or offer things like parental leave or paid respite services for new families and new parents, so they can return to work and feel successful in that journey. And the other thing, the other thing I wanted to note as well is the fact that we also know we now have a declining birth rate here in the US, essentially meaning that we actually don't have our population having babies at the rate we need them to in order to replace the population. So in other words, of course, that's important for things like tax revenues and things like that as well. But we also know there are a lot of young people in our country today making choices about whether they do have children or how many children they have because of these challenges around childcare and affordability. In fact, just candidly talking to my younger sister who is about to get married but does not have any children of her own, when we started talking about children, that was something that she had shared was, well, we know that if we decide to have kids, really one of us is going to need to give up our career for a while in order to do that, because it's going to be too expensive for us to pay over $2,000 a month for childcare. And, it's something very serious for them, and something that, I don't think either one of them wants to take a break from their careers in order to do that. So it's something that a lot of young families and young parents now are thinking about. So a quick snapshot at what childcare in Arvada specifically looks like. This is data that came from Childcare Innovations out of Red Rocks Community College in Arvada. They are the local early childhood council. And so they are the ones who support directly a lot of the licensed caregivers and licensed early care and centers and homes across Arvada. So this is what the quality levels look like in Arvada right now. And essentially this is just tied to what's called the Colorado Shines Quality Rating Improvement System. This is a system where by nature of being licensed through the state, you are classified as a level 1 program. And then you actually have to take steps as a program to go through additional levels and essentially verify or demonstrate the quality level. So we have only 2 of them at level 1, 57 at level 2. You can see 18 at level 3. And 3 at level 5. I will say this is by no means indicative of the fact that, you know, some of these programs aren't quality. It just speaks to the fact that some of them haven't actually gone through a full observation and verification process. So once you get to level 3, 4, and 5, that actually requires an on-site observation and a pretty thorough quality rating process that they go through. But this gives you some indication, and some programs do get to level 2 and they say, you know, we're not going to go through the rest of the steps because we have a 2-year, 3-year waiting list for our program. And, you know, parents demand, you know, our services are in demand regardless. And so perhaps the quality ratings may not be such a driver for them. I also wanted to take a look at our childcare supply in Arvada. Again, this is also information coming from Childcare Innovations. So we have 336 slots or, you know, spaces for children in family childcare homes. I know we have at least one of them on the webinar today. 3,257 spaces for children in licensed childcare centers. And you can see what the estimated need is here for families in Arvada as well, based on the workforce participation rates and based on what we know about households that have all adult caregivers in the home participating in the workforce. So clearly a significant shortage there in terms of availability for childcare. And oftentimes these are the parents who are, you know, somehow weaving together childcare solutions with a mix of family members or neighbors or friends. Sometimes families are, you know, one has a third shift and one works during the day, right? They somehow work it out. But oftentimes it's not without a toll on parents' mental health, and certainly a challenge for the family to figure out how they actually make that work. So all of that data really leads us to this point where we know that, especially in Colorado, we have population growth. We've got lots of people still moving to Colorado. It's a great state to live in, an awesome place to work and raise your family. We know that we're also recovering our jobs, and we have significant industry growth and really strong diversification here in Colorado. So wonderful things working for us here in Arvada and in Colorado across the state. But unfortunately, we also know that childcare access and affordability is actually not only insufficient, but it's been declining over the years. So even throughout the pandemic, Arvada alone also had programs that actually closed, childcare programs that closed, and were unable to keep their doors open because of the financial impacts on their business model, with, you know, families keeping children home, lower enrollment, certainly closures that were mandated, things like that. And in between, of course, we have our skilled talent in the workforce that all of our employers are looking for. And we have these kind of pulls on both sides with this workforce. We have individuals who could be in the workforce, who want to be in the workforce, but can't be because of this childcare access and affordability issue. And we also know, of course, that Colorado being the great state it is, and Arvada having a strong economy, you know, employers are going to continue to need that workforce and are going to continue to see job growth and industry growth as well. And to bring that really to a much finer point, we can actually also quantify this in terms of what is the economic cost of the childcare shortage. Now, this data is coming from a study that was released in early of 2020 from the Council for Strong America. So I will state that these are very conservative numbers because A, the study was completed before the pandemic hit. And so we know this has become a much more significant issue for families since the pandemic has occurred. But we also know that this study was conducted really focused on the lack of infant and toddler care. So that would be care for children who are who are birth through age 3, essentially. And that specifically is where we have the most acute shortage of childcare. And so if we take kind of a larger perspective on this, again, these numbers would likely be larger. But to break this down a little bit for you, we're going to use GDP percentages for both Jefferson County as well as Arvada to look at these costs to the local economy as well as employers. So for Colorado, you can see, we've got a 2.2 billion economic costs for this issue across our state with $680 million cost for employers. If we look at the kind of the average economic contribution cost of a job being roughly $110,000 a year for the local economy, then we can actually also quantify this into what that opportunity cost looks like in terms of jobs. For Colorado specifically, that would be about 20,000 jobs as an opportunity cost. If we granulate this into Jefferson County, you can see the numbers there. Again, not small numbers by any means. These are significant costs that our local businesses and our local economies and communities are carrying. And for Arvada specifically, it's a $29 million problem for Arvada right now from an economic standpoint. We also have employers in Arvada carrying about $9 million in costs because of this challenge around childcare and an opportunity cost of about 80 jobs. So for those of you who really like to quantify these issues and think about them in terms of, of what this is really kind of weighing down in terms of your growth or your economy or your organization locally, hopefully this will help a little bit too. Okay. That's lots of data, Nicole. Thank you for sharing all of that. Now I'm, really concerned. What can we do about this? So now we're going to talk about what employers and business leaders can do, because this is really why EPIC exists. We exist to really leverage the influence and I think the important role that business leaders and employers play in the lives of Colorado families and children, because they can do a lot. And, in terms of their own policies and practices as employers, but also just in terms of the state in general. And that's the reason why EPIC does even policy work at the state level, because our members in EPIC and our business leaders can be very powerful with their voices in terms of looking at state policy. So again, a great graphic coming from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on how this looks in terms of organizations actually implementing and making some change within their own entities and their own teams. So I know that, for example, Arvada has a lot of small businesses. And so there are definitely things that even small businesses or big businesses can do to address this for their employees and start to think about how they take small steps forward to address a lot of these childcare and early education issues for workers. So, and again, this is really about building and protecting your talent pipeline, because we know that for many families, this is a barrier to actually coming into the talent pipeline and participating in the workforce. But also for a lot of working parents, this is a reason why they leave. And so if you can do some work and proactively implement some strategies in your own organization to really mitigate this effect, then you as an organization or an employer can be much more successful in those endeavors to actually find and retain the talent in the workforce that you need for your operations to be as successful as they can be. So we're going to talk about these in 3 categories: quick wins, internal investments, and community investments. So 3 categories that I think, you can take or leave any one of these. And like I said, start to do small things in implementing your own policies and procedures. Okay, so we've all heard the saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it has never been more true than today after the pandemic. It is certainly hugely important for workers to feel like their challenges are acknowledged and understood and also responded to as much as possible. So first off, employers can ask for feedback and collect data on what the challenges for their employees really are. Only 13% of employers actually do this right now in a very kind of formal or objective way. So for example, many employers rely on information kind of coming up the informal chain of command or through supervisors or through human resources to really understand what these childcare challenges are. But we also know from surveys that employees are very unlikely to really tell you the accurate truth around what their childcare challenges are for fear of feeling like they might be penalized or might lose opportunities down the road for promotion. So doing some sort of anonymous, formal feedback effort to really learn from your employees and your team what their challenges are can be tremendously helpful, and I think will also be very revealing for a lot of employers. Check your training and your norms. So in other words, how do you normalize challenges of working families? Does your culture really still frown upon that? I think, when this pandemic happened and we started seeing little children bounce around in Zoom screens, which I certainly had. I have a second grader now, but she was in kindergarten when the pandemic hit, and I was a part-time kindergarten teacher for half of one year. I was a part-time first grade teacher for half of another year, neither of which I was very good at, by the way, but she was always popping in and out of my Zoom screens, right, saying hi. I had to, shuffle my schedule around, pick up, drop off, all those types of things. How does your organization really model and normalize that those challenges that working families have are acceptable and just a fact of life? And I think, business leaders play a large role in that. So as much as leadership can also normalize and model that, it's going to be tremendously helpful to help set the tone for the rest of the organization. Ensuring consistency across supervisors and annual reviews. This is an area, EPIC does a lot of consulting with our members and employers across Colorado around these types of things. And this is an area where we see a lot of challenges with lack of continuity. So for example, leadership or the business owner or the CEO says, hey, we're a family-friendly organization and we want you to be flexible. But when it comes down to it, that person might have a supervisor who really doesn't think that should be the case. And so oftentimes annual reviews might be happening where, individuals are essentially penalized because they haven't, really kind of, been as available as other people on the team because of their challenges as a working parent. And in fact, I actually have like a personal story about this. I have a friend who works for a company here in Colorado who called me in tears weeks ago. She's a single mom with a child who was in first grade when the pandemic hit. Same thing, was trying to, keep her job, do her work from home, make ends meet, pay the bills, make sure she could keep the townhome that she had worked so hard to buy herself. And also make sure that she was keeping her son's virtual learning on track and kind of manage all of that as a single parent. Her review came around this year and her supervisor was evaluating her based on this criteria that had been really created before the pandemic, right? And really hadn't had any specific thought given to it as far as maybe what some specific employees with children had dealt with throughout the pandemic. And not only was she not given, an increase to account for, her good work, but she was also told she wasn't getting a pay raise because she really hadn't been as available for some team huddles as other team members had been. She has other people on her team who are single, who don't have children, who could really be available on these team huddles at whatever time. And she might have been also trying to get her son onto a Zoom class at the same time and wasn't able to show up as often. And so, of course, in today's day and age, inflation, right? Everything's getting more expensive. Costs are going up for her as a single mom. She's not getting a raise and feels like, this annual review system that was applied to her is really inequitable as a single mom who's been dealing with so much during this pandemic. And guess what she's doing now? She's looking for a new job. So that employer who has invested lots of time and money into training her, she's a hard worker. She cares deeply about her job. She's now going to go through the process of looking for something else so she can not only, of course, pay for the rising costs of gas and food and all those things that have happened, but now that employer is going to have to look for another employee and retrain an entire person. So a really good example of how some of these very small, nuanced policies and practices and procedures internally can have really big impacts. Again, think about flexibility, job sharing, and split shifts. So even if you're an organization that really, can't have people working from home, how can you change your shift schedule around so that you could potentially have individuals who are sharing one shift together? Maybe you have someone who wants to work in the morning, someone who wants to work in the afternoon, and can do those things together, and flexibility as much as possible. And also think about when you're doing interviews and looking for potential candidates. Sometimes childcare is a challenge in even searching for a job. And so how can you accommodate that as an employer as well? And, I will say, I think this is one area where I think small businesses actually have an advantage and an upper hand in what's been happening with the pandemic. Because a lot of large companies are still trying to shift their models and respond to a lot of these impacts of the pandemic. And for larger companies, that's a much heavier lift. It takes a lot longer for them to really change those HR policies and make those changes. Small businesses can be very nimble and quick with how they implement these changes as well. So I would say, this is something that small businesses, especially, I think, are well positioned to do and to be very nimble in terms of how they make changes internally and respond to some of these challenges. All right, let's talk about internal investments. So expanding family-friendly benefits, this can be a range of things. And again, to give you an example, Epic, we're a small nonprofit, we have a small team, but one of the benefits we added in the past couple of years was paying for any sort of childcare for our employees when we have events or, work obligations that are outside of the typical work hours that we hold. So anytime we're asking people to show up for an evening or weekend event, do something like that, we automatically pay for their childcare, which is a really nice feature for them to have, so they don't have to worry about that. But you as a company can help support things like finding childcare, providing backup childcare. Of course, dependent care savings accounts are options, and employers actually have payroll tax savings when they utilize those mechanisms. Paid family leave, bringing non-mobile infants to work. We've seen a lot of employers implement that strategy where, early on, families or working parents, working moms especially, can bring those non-mobile infants to work so they can, have them maybe near their desk, or if they're working from home, can keep them at home. Oftentimes they might be breastfeeding, and it might be a challenge to, of course, not only find childcare, but juggle all those pieces too. So a lot of employers have done that. And of course, you can also just implement a simple childcare stipend. So, that parents could really use anywhere when it comes to, the childcare that they're choosing for their children. You could work with local childcare providers in your area to negotiate community discounts as an employer. So for example, if you want to make sure that your employees can have access to childcare, maybe at a discount, work with some of those local family childcare homes or childcare centers to negotiate discounts and essentially, pay those businesses to help, make sure that that's affordable for your employees, and also have some preferred access potentially as well. And then also, if you're a larger employer and you have, operations that happen on one campus and will continue to do so, think about on-site or near-site childcare. So for a lot of reasons, this has really helped with recruitment and retention for employers across Colorado. It offers convenience. We know that employers are much more productive when they have their children on-site and nearby. Colorado has a brand new employer-based childcare grant program that for this year has an $8.8 million allocation to it. Employers can access up to $800,000 in grant funding if they are offering on-site or near-site childcare and developing that. And then Epic actually led an employer-based childcare design lab this past year with 10 employers around the state of Colorado to actually help walk them through that process of how to develop on-site or near-site childcare, which included everything from governance to risk to financial modeling to finding an operations partner, all of those different pieces as well. So we've got, a hospital in Grand Junction that's building on-site childcare, manufacturing up in Longmont that's building it, a food hall down in Pueblo that's building, an incubator for new restaurants, as well as affordable housing and childcare together. So lots of really cool concepts. We've got a city and county working together to build childcare for their town. So lots of different types of employers and organizations around the state. It is, there is some risk to childcare. Certainly, you're taking care of young children, but certainly I think there is some myth busting to do with regards to the risk for this for employers. We see a lot of employers now cost sharing this type of service and investment. So, perhaps 3 or 4 employers in a community coming together to all invest in the creation of a new community childcare program, and supporting that. And also really talking about a return on investment. So Patagonia, for example, has operated on-site childcare for many years. They anticipate that only about 20% of their investment is unrecouped. In other words, they recuperate most of those costs through either tax abatements or increased employee engagement, reduced turnover for their workforce, and other things like that that come back to them on returns on their investment as well. And then, of course, we have employer advocacy and community investments that could be made. And so, again, it's really important that we have employers really, serving as a voice in our larger community around this issue. Thinking about what are equal job benefits versus what are equitable job benefits. Childcare comes up a lot when it comes to this conversation, because people say, oh, well, if you offer childcare, then not everyone has children, not everyone can take advantage of that. That's absolutely true. But I will also say that the workforce that most employers are desperately looking for and or want to attract, want to retain, and want to promote are also oftentimes working parents who can't even afford to find or can't find childcare. So it's a huge issue, and it's something that from an equity standpoint is important to think about when it comes to the workforce and the talent that you aren't able to reach right now. We also see a lot of companies offering kind of a menu of benefits. And so maybe instead of taking a $300 a month childcare stipend, employees can choose other benefits on a menu of benefits that they offer as well. But definitely think about these childcare benefits in terms of, equity, number one, and number two, a strategy to reach your potential talent pipeline that you're really not even tapping into right now. Employers should absolutely advocate for these challenges through their chambers, through local partners, and even through EPIC. We have business leaders who get involved in EPIC because they really want to be a leading voice in Colorado on this issue. Some of our business leaders testify at committee hearings at the Capitol. We have roundtables with the governor to talk about these issues for employers and these talent challenges that a lot of employers have, and how we can solve these things. We've been very involved in the development of universal preschool here in Colorado, and how that model has actually been kind of formatively developed to make sure that universal preschool, for example, is working well for working families, that families can access quality preschool in a number of environments that work well for their family and their situation. So if they want to access universal preschool in a family childcare home versus maybe a community-based childcare center, or even within a public school, that those are all options that they can access with the way this new program is being developed and modeled. And business leaders have been an incredibly important voice in that process to really call out how much they want to make sure that these new investments we're making in Colorado are working well for working families, and also just really meet the needs of children and parents first and foremost. As employers and as businesses in Colorado, you can put your assets to good use. Real estate is incredibly expensive here in Colorado. It is also one of the reasons why it is so difficult to open and maintain and sustain a childcare business. A childcare business needs on average 3 times the amount of square footage for children as the average private company needs for an employee. right? Children need space to grow and learn and play and run around and chase each other and do all of those wonderful things that kids do. But if you are, an organization that has access to real estate that is either underutilized or vacant, or maybe you're making changes to your workforce and you feel like you've got some potential space that could be used for childcare, that's absolutely a way that you can help invest in this issue for your community as well. And also really invest in broader community efforts to increase access to quality and affordable childcare for the workforce. So this could be through scholarship programs with your local early childhood council. So Childcare Innovations at Red Rocks is the local early childhood council in Jefferson County. You can certainly get involved in some larger initiatives statewide. Colorado has an amazing tax credit mechanism called the Colorado Childcare Tax Credit. And any company or individual can contribute up to $200,000 a year and take a 50% tax credit on that contribution, so long as that program is either a licensed childcare program or they've been grandfathered in as kind of an intermediary. So there's lots of different ways that that employers can also get involved and invest in this issue, because it's not really, we have issues around affordability for families, and certainly I think that's a way that employers can address that through their benefit structure. But we also have serious issues with our supply in Colorado and making sure that we have access and availability of the actual childcare slots and services. We've seen a number of family childcare homes close across Colorado over the years. It's been a serious issue that, we've been very concerned about. I think there's been some good policy work done to address some of the issues that we saw there around things like zoning codes and HOAs or things like that. But we want to make sure that families have access to a broad range of care settings, and family childcare homes especially can be very, very helpful and can really be the best care option for a lot of families who maybe, want a smaller kind of more one-on-one setting for their children, or maybe they work a third shift, or maybe they work 12-hour shifts and they need someone who can accommodate early hours, late nights, or even sometimes weekend care. And so, all of these different types of early care and education settings are really important for families depending on what their needs are. All right, that's a lot of talking on my part. Hopefully that gave you some great food for thought and things to jot down in the process. I'm happy to take questions, and we'll kind of dive into a Q&A from here. So don't be shy, feel free to chat them in. I'm happy to just dialogue with everyone and hear what your questions and thoughts and reflections are now. So
this is Rachel.
Go ahead.
Just a question for you. Do you know any companies around, I guess, the area?
Rachel, did you have a question?
Yes. Do you know any companies around the area that offer a discount?
So Nicole, can you hear Rachel? She is talking. Can you hear her okay?
Oh, sorry, I lost my audio. There we go. I'm back.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Rachel. Okay. I think we're clear now.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay.
No, you're fine. Do you know any companies around the area of Arvada that do offer kind of a discount program that we can add to our benefits package?
I don't know of any specific companies in Arvada per se that do this. I mean, there definitely could be that I don't know about. But we certainly have seen, organizations where perhaps, they have like a larger, childcare facility nearby where they've, negotiated some sort of discount program and or tuition subsidy for their employees. I think the challenge that most employers find in this situation, though, is that when they do approach community programs to look at this type of option, there are huge wait lists for infants and toddlers. And so I think, oftentimes, even if those community programs wanted to set up some sort of partnership, it would take a while for that to filter down because of the fact that oftentimes, they've got, 70 infants on a wait list for 10 slots. I mean, that's just unfortunately the reality that we see in most of Colorado, but especially in Arvada. it's a very difficult situation when it comes to the capacity and the availability for those younger children too.
Go ahead, Katie.
Okay. Hey, good morning. Thanks so much for the conversation. I'm actually one of those parents. When I moved to Colorado for my husband's job, I couldn't take a job at the local community college because my entire paycheck would go towards paying for childcare. So 2 questions. I just want to clarify, childcare's differentiation from early childhood education and preschool, because I jumped at the chance to enroll my kid in Lit's preschool, which was an amazing opportunity, but also cost me $800 a month. So can you talk a little bit about, just clarify the ages you're talking about when you say, is it birth to 3? And then maybe, as I think Dawn O'Dean was on the call, can you talk a little bit about the governor's efforts and your organization's efforts to advocate for more financial assistance for early childhood education, rate of pay? I mean, there sounds like there's barriers to entry, because if childcare was a lucrative business, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah.
So can you clarify a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Really great question there. So when it comes to, people call it daycare, people call it childcare, some people call it early education or preschool. Preschool specifically is a term used for the care and education of children in the year before kindergarten, really, right? And some programs classify themselves as preschool programs and may say, we just have a really kind of, we're not providing full day 10-hour, care of children, but we're really providing this kind of very targeted curriculum that's focused on preparation for kindergarten. So sometimes that's the differential that you hear around preschool. But we know that quality care and early education, preschool education is happening in a variety of settings, including family child care homes and in community-based childcare programs. So, I see like Carrie Kennedy is on the webinar today. She's an amazing family childcare home provider. And I feel safe saying that, the care and the education and, the kindergarten preparation that she can offer her children in her family childcare home is quality and is just as good as they might receive in another program in the community, right? So it's also about what families really need and what that's going to look like, because for some families, although they may like to bring their child to, say, for example, a specific preschool program, if it's only offered for 6 hours a day and there are transportation logistics or care logistics that come into play and they're working a 10-hour shift, that may not work quite as well for them in terms of what they actually need as a working family. So, when we're talking about this, we are talking about kind of the birth to 5-year-old spectrum. But we're also, implementing universal preschool in Colorado, which was authorized by voters across the state through Proposition EE on the ballot in 2020. And so through that effort, now we are implementing a system whereby programs that are offering these quality, care and education experiences for children in that year before kindergarten can then serve children, and families will essentially have 10 hours of that free preschool experience offered to them through the state funding. If the families, for example, have some challenges with affordability, it's a lower income household, or maybe the child has identified disabilities and needs some additional services, then that family might actually receive more than 10 hours per week to support that preschool experience for that child. But the system is being developed as what we call a mixed delivery system, which essentially means that those high quality preschool experiences, so long as those providers meet certain quality standards, can be delivered in a public school setting, in a community-based setting, and even in a home setting, so long as they meet those requirements and quality standards for offering high quality care and education for that preschool year. And you're right, workforce is certainly a challenge for early childhood. There is a tax credit bill going through the legislature this year to offer a refundable tax credit for individuals who are early childhood educators, in an effort to help really recognize and award, but also attract and retain those individuals in the industry. There are some new career pathway programs that have launched. In fact, Red Rocks and Childcare Innovations is really running a really cool apprenticeship model for early childhood educators and teachers But really at the end of the day, we know that this is a very stressed business model. And when 75% of your revenues are going to pay, you know, the wages of teachers in your program, and you can't even pay those teachers the wages you want to pay them, it doesn't leave much room for growth there in terms of that piece. So some of the work Epic is doing is kind of looking at the expenses on the flip side of that. Of course, we want to talk about, you know, how do we get the right revenue and sufficient revenue to these operators to really cover the cost of offering quality care. But we're also looking at ways to really free up some of those operational expenses, things like debt service, cost of taxes, cost of the real estate itself, whether that's a mortgage or rent, some of those pieces too. I know there are some programs in Arvada, for example, that pay over $100,000 a year just in commercial property taxes for their space. And so, you know, like when we talk about the cost that they need to charge families for care or how much they're paying their teachers, you know, all of these expenses kind of go into that business equation for these childcare businesses and early education models. So we're also trying to think about how we, you know, try to free up some revenue in certain areas so that they can pay teachers more, attract more people into the workforce, and, you know, offer quality and not have to charge families as much either.
So we do have another question in the chat from Jenny. Can you discuss more your pilot project that you did with some businesses to access childcare on site? What did that look like?
Yeah, great question. So our design lab had 10 employers from across the state of Colorado, mostly in rural, resort, and frontier regions of our state. So for example, Community Hospital in Grand Junction is one of those employers who, you know, they were really, really struggling to attract and retain their workforce. And when they asked people, you know, oftentimes why they were leaving or some of the reasons why maybe they couldn't take the job, childcare and affordability was a big one. And so they have some extra land next to one of their buildings, and they are they're running a capital campaign. They actually already applied for that state grant program in the first round of grants and received a grant for $800,000 and are pursuing an on-site childcare facility that will serve primarily their employees, but also I think a few community slots as well, as long as they have availability. And they are also looking at a sliding scale. So for example, if you're a physician in their hospital making obviously much better money than someone in environmental services, you're going to pay more for that care than, you know, someone who's a CNA or environmental services. We've got, you know, school districts, small school district in Weld County R1 school district who, you know, again, couldn't find the teachers they needed to run their school district. And so they're building infant and toddler care onto one of their school buildings so their teachers can have their babies and their toddlers cared for while they're teaching. We have the city of Meeker and Pioneer Medical Center and Rio Blanco County building a child care facility in the town of Meeker because Meeker recently got broadband service. And now that people can work from home, more people are moving to their community. And they were like, oh, wow, like we don't have any child care. What do we do? And so that is, you know, it's a need that they identified pretty quickly. So all of these are different types of employers. Steamboat Ski Resort. I think it's a really cool story. Steamboat Ski Resort had a couple of moms who were in leadership positions working for the ski resort who had actually gotten to the point where they were going to have to quit their jobs and leave their positions at the ski resort because they could not find childcare for their young children. And they went to the CEO in Altera, which is the parent company, and said, we need to build on-site childcare for our employees. We are going to lose people. We are losing people. There are people we can't hire because of this issue. And so they're in the process right now of actually securing a space and building out on-site childcare for their employees as well. So those are just a few examples of, you know, of organizations that I think have really seen this as an investment that is well worth the money because they see the losses that they're incurring in terms of their talent that's leaving, as well as their talent that they actually can't hire.
And we have time for one more question before we move into breakout rooms. Anybody else have something looming? Okay, very good. Well, I am so grateful for you, Nicole. You did an incredible job sharing what is a really complicated system and a lot of information. And so we are so grateful. I know it's always a little awkward on Zoom, but if there was a round of applause button, I would hit it right now because you deserve it, because you did awesome. So thank you so much for all you've shared.